Let me start back with sort of when the railroads came to town. What do you know about, um, how the railroads got into town? And I know that there's a little bit of a controversy with some people wanted it here and some people didn't, and
Well,
everything.
I guess there's somebody else who could be a better source for about that from me than I can. I do know that Eleanor Henderson wrote quite a booklet about railroad transportation. Have you seen that one and read that one?
I think I have.
Yes.
You have a number of.
It's a flexible
booklets.
pamphlet.
Right.
Yeah, and so she's one of the best sources I know. I remember seeing the trains. I remember seeing the trains on the track. I remember seeing the building to the left of the track, which is now the Historical Society room for the exhibit of all the paintings.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
What was that? Was that like a caboose?
No, it was I don't know if it was used for storage, but it was there as you look at the track, it would be to your left if you were standing on the town side. And so I remember that, but I never traveled on the train myself. But I think I remember saying goodbye to a high school class that were going to Washington partly on the train.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's the only memory that I have. I think that one of the conductors was a man by the name of Slavin, and his family lived on the corner of Highland Avenue and Seaview Street, and they gave the land for our church, and they gave the land for the priest residence, the rectory, and so that's what I remember about the railroad, which isn't too much.
Mm. Was the depot? Is that the same location that it's always been at, or was it moved?
Yeah, no, that to my knowledge, that was the location.
So it wasn't very common for people, if you were just going to go to Harwich, to take the train over to Harwich then?
Well, some people would do that. I remember that when I was a little baby, my mother she had planned to go to Pawtucket, Rhode Island with me. I was an infant. And she became ill on the train, and the conductor had to take her off and call people to come and get her. So that was the only experience that I have, and that was before I remembered it.
There were probably a lot of changes that happened in town when the railroad first got here. I think it was 1887, around there. What sort of changes do you think probably were taking place about that time in terms of, how that might have affected tourism in Chatham?
Well, I think it encouraged the tourism, and it was a long trip for people to get here, even on the train. But I'm sure that it fostered tourism, and of course, tourism really began in Chatham heavily in the 1880s and 90s, and then has increased ever since. And all the inns and hotels began to open up, and of course, in the village where I lived I guess I was 9 or 10, we had all kinds of rooming houses and 2 or 3 boarding houses where women cooked marvelous meals, and so you saw the increase of all the hotels and inns and the private rooming houses and all the boarding places. So it made a big difference, but it was a long trip for most people to get to the Cape in those days.
How long do you think it took to get down from Boston? I mean, I know before that time they had the packets and the stagecoach, which probably took quite a long time. Did the railroad significantly cut that travel time, or was it pretty much the same? Maybe just
well, some people have told me about it taking 5 hours to get here from Boston. Now, whether or not that would have happened to everyone, I don't know. But for some people, they've told me that. But we pretty much were snug in our own little homes in the village, and I don't remember going up to the railroad station very much when I was a child. And we didn't go very far.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't either when I was still around here myself. So. But do you think that, I'm sure that certain, there were a lot of little industries that were happening in town around that time, like the salt works and the cranberries.
Yeah.
And I'm sure
Right.
the fishermen had some benefit with suddenly be able to get their fish quickly to market.
Oh, sure. It made a big difference.
Tell me a little bit about what you know about that stuff. I mean, would that have affected
as far as
cargo?
as far as cranberries are concerned, we had a cranberry bog down here at the foot of Mill Pond Hill. I think it was owned by Joseph Eldridge, Joe C. we used to call him, and he would be the grandfather of Bill Eldridge, who runs the taxi company down here, and he owned this bog, to my knowledge. And after they were all through getting their cranberries from the bog, they would allow the ladies and the children in the neighborhood to go down there with their buckets and take what cranberries were left. So that was a cranberry bog that was right close to us, and we loved that part.
Yeah, that's not a bad deal. They're
That was
expensive.
that was a great experience. Oh yes, but that was great fun, having all the neighbors go down with the children. So that's what I remember about cranberry bogs. But I had an interesting discussion up at the library one day, not too long ago, about a man who had been in the cranberry business up in Wareham. And he said something which I had never thought about before. He said that cranberry business could be a very lonely business when you're out there all alone in the bogs, no one else around. And I had never thought about that, you know. But I worry a little bit about our cranberry industry, you know, because we've had such good luck for such a long time. And right now, it's a little hectic, I guess, for the people who are cranberry bog people.
Yeah, that's what I've been hearing. There's been some certainly down like in Falmouth. I think there was something going on last year with the growers lost a significant portion of their crop and stuff.
Well, of course, Wisconsin and New Jersey, I guess, and other states too, are in the cranberry business, and I guess Wisconsin is quite a competitor of ours.
I've heard that, at least if nothing else, no matter what problems they're having, I mean, the cranberries certainly are a very popular item.
Oh, yes.
And probably
yes.
even more so than they were when you were a kid.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
I mean, it's only gained in popularity, so that should
I
probably
know.
help them.
And cranberry juice, I drink it by the gallon.
Yeah.
Can't live without it.
You were talking about I was kind of interested, you were talking about the boarding houses and everything.
Oh, yes.
I hadn't really thought about that. I knew that a lot of the big hotels went up and they were kind of real luxurious, but
Yes.
it never occurred to me that there were a lot of private people
Oh,
in
yes.
town.
If you had walked through the village streets down here below, in this area, that you would have seen a rooms to rent sign on many, many of the homes. And I remember my mother, when we first lived in this house, used to rent rooms, and she thought long and hard about whether she would raise the rent 50 cents a week for the people who came to sleep at our house. But the people in the village were in the room business for a long time, and we had a Mrs. Bradley Mayo used to have a place where she fed people, and my aunt at one time ran a boarding house, and she was a wonderful cook. And I've seen her get 14 people in a tiny little dining room. It was amazing. But because their rooms had to be, the people in the rooms had to be fed, of course that caused the boarding houses to open. But of course, we had some good inns, you know, very early on. Chatham Bars Inn, of course, 1914 and on, and Mattaquasson. I worked at the Mattaquasson as a girl, and I think I must have been about 13 or 14. Took care of some children down there, and that was a lovely location. And we could swim if we took care of the children. We could swim, and it was a safe beach, and there was always a lifeguard there, and there was some wonderful clientele there. And they also had a lovely musical evening for the guests, and it was lovely classical music and beautifully done, and it was a very, very nice hotel. Mattaquasson was.
Where was it? That was located up on Watch Hill, is that right? At Marcellus
Adjacent to Watch Hill, yeah, right. Of course, Watch Hill was our place when we thought we owned that place because we were allowed to go down there skating on the ice, you know. And we, Mr. Brown, who was the caretaker, we called him Farmer Brown, and we thought he owned the place when we were children, and then we discovered later that he was the keeper. But when we went skating, it was to Brown's Pond. We called it by Brown's Pond. And my brother and I came home one day, soaking wet. We had come down, the hills were wonderful there. We could slide down and have a great long ride. And he and I both crashed through the ice at the foot of one of the hills. And I can remember that we plotted. We thought if we waited until Elisha Burris, the grocery man, had delivered the groceries and was talking to my mother, maybe if we slid into the house then we wouldn't get hit quite so badly as if we had gone in alone. I can remember the plotting we went through while we froze with the ice and water on us.
Wow, that must have been cold.
Oh, it was. But it was wonderful for the children in the village to have that place to go because our parents knew we were safe, you know. They knew just where we were.
What sort of place was the hotel as far as what it looked like on the inside?
Mattaquasson? Well, it had a great big lobby, as I recall, rooms both on the first floor and the second floor, and maybe even on the third. And then they had an extension for a kitchen. I remember seeing a dining room all set up with lovely white napkins and nice silver every night. It was a nice, comfortable place for people to come, and people of average means could go there and have a vacation. They had some cottages attached there too. They had 2 or 3 cottages, which would be right next to the Eldridge property, which was great, whatever hill we called it. And I thought that was a really nice hotel. But then there came a time, and I guess they burned it to the ground to let it go. And of course,
that was in the 50s, right?
Yeah. So, and then of course the Hawes House was in the village.
I haven't heard about that one.
Yeah, the Hawes House was, Water Street comes out, so that the Hawes House is on the corner of Water Street and Main, almost down to the lighthouse. And they had family service for years. People would go and get rooms there, and they would also have what they called family tables. And people would sit long tables, and you would pass the food from one to the other. Of course, it was a good thing if you were at the head of the table. I don't know what happened by the time you got to the end. So, but that was well run for years and years and years. And Freeman Howe's widow is still living, and they ran it for years. The senior house, and then Ike House, who was a wonderful man with his wife, and then that went to the 3rd generation, Freeman and his wife Lucille.
How about the Hotel Chatham? Do you know anything about that?
Well, Hotel
that
Chatham.
was like one of the first ones. Right?
Yes, but it was I guess it was a beautiful hotel, because I never saw it. But it was just a very limited time that existed, because apparently it was considered too far out for people to get to very easily, and but apparently was a very luxurious place and very elaborate on the outside, but. It just didn't function. I don't think it lasted even 10 years. I think it was less than that.
Wow.
But it was quite the place to go, I guess, in its time.
So there was probably early on when the railroad first got here and people really started to come down in some sort of on a regular basis. There was probably a sort of a change in the type of people that came down, or what they, initially they were probably fairly wealthy people, don't you think?
Well, they would have had to be quite wealthy, I guess, to go to either Chatham Bars or that Hotel Chatham. And of course, I think the other place, the Dill Cottages, for instance, on the place now that's had the abutment built at the end down there in the village, that was a moderate place. And so there were those expensive places and less expensive, and I think we had quite a variety, actually. Of course, we have a tradition of some really old, long-time visitors to Chatham. When I go up into North Chatham, for instance, I can think of days that I used to babysit up there in the Loveland House, for instance, which was filled with gorgeous antiques, and they told me they hadn't bought any more than 2 pieces of furniture in their whole lives. It had all come down through their families. And I could think of Lovelands and Whitings and Hurds and Donhams. Wallace Donham was a dean at Harvard, I know. And all those wonderful old-time families, Stearns, and just great summer people who came year after year, and really established a tradition of coming to the Cape as well. 1880s and 1890s, some of them came, I think. So.
Did they typically come all summer?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
and they bought,
houses?
And they bought houses and had children and grandchildren come, and then those younger people inherited the homes. And North Chatham especially was a lovely place to come in the summertime. And Joe would talk about that in great detail, I'm sure. The Old Harbor Inn was a place that many people came in the summer. That was converted from an individual. I guess they first of all had a home, and then it was made into a long 3-floor house, and they had people come from New Jersey, New York. Lots of judges seemed to like to come there because it was quiet and isolated, and they could relax. And I worked there for 7 summers when I was going through college, and it was one place where if the guests had lobster, the girls who waited on table had lobster. And my father thought it was just wonderful because I gained 16 pounds the first summer I worked there. And I was a little bit roly-poly. But it was the Nickerson family, Willard Nickerson. And Joe worked there, I'm sure. And Ellen Ferris. All the grandchildren worked there at one time or another. Wendell Deere's wife, Harriet, who's long gone. And so for 7 summers, that was the place where I lived, and I loved North Chatham. You go up, we had what we call Sky Parlor where we slept, those who waited on table.
Are you talking about the Dill Cottages?
No, I'm talking about the Old Harbor Inn on North Chatham. And you could look out over the bar, see moonlight on that bar. It was a beautiful spot. So that functioned until the gas shortage, in World War II, and then it sort of folded. But Rufus and Hattie Nickerson had it for years and years and years, and then Nina and Willard had it. They were the son and daughter-in-law, and so they kept it as long as they could. But it was then again far out in World War II, where people were rationed on gasoline. You see, so that's what happened there. But it was a lovely inn. They served wonderful, wholesome food.
It sounds like the people that were coming down. Back then, you said they were here all summer, and it's kind of a tradition.
Many were.
Kids. It sounds quite different than what it is today, where you have a lot of people coming down for a week in the summer, and if they buy a house, it normally turned over fairly quickly, or their investments more than anything. And do you think that the activities that people did were different? I mean, what sort of things did you see these people doing over the course of a summer?
Well, there was a lot of sailing in North Chatham, and here too. A lot of sailing. A lot of going out fishing in a rowboat, of course swimming all the time, tennis, golf. Early on, the golf course at the Chatham Bars Inn was active, and people who came for the summer played Chatham Bars Inn golf course a lot. And of course we knew more about that than we knew about Eastwood Hoe. But as the years went on, my brother Harry caddied at Eastwood Hoe, and he caddied also at Chatham Bars Inn. Some people would play golf twice a day, and so people were very active around here, around the shore. I can't think of anyone that I knew who wasn't outside most of the summer, and it was really a nice time for all of us. It was we native kids loved to have the summer kids come because we had new playmates, and we looked forward to seeing them year after year. But activity, of course, perhaps as people grew more affluent, they could play golf more often and pay the fees. But golf was an early tradition here, and tennis was an early tradition.
How about the beaches? I mean, typically that's kind of the number one attraction now.
Yeah,
Do you think it was the same back then as far as going to the beach and sitting? Or were they more active than?
Well, I tell you, there's a lot more boating now than there was of every kind. But actually, we had the best of both worlds because we could go down to what we called the back beach, which was about the lighthouse and all the way along, or we could go to the mill pond because the big mill pond was a great place for kids to swim. And as we grew older, when I was maybe about 10 or 12 or more, we could swim down here. And it was great down here because in those days there would be 40 kids there on a summer afternoon. But you see, now it's so much boating that there's very little swimming down here at the Little Mill Pond. More around the bend, I think. But people would go and have picnics on the beach. Our family would be picnicking all the time. And I remember one time we were there for a picnic of 2 or 3 families. And my mother had a guest from Provincetown, a girl, and they wanted to play ball on the beach. And they somehow, the ball missed one of the people and went into the water. And they wanted to get the ball back, so they took a dory that was on the shore and got in the dory. First they lost 1 oar, then they lost the 2nd oar. And by that time they were getting into the breakers, and that was dangerous stuff. And out from his house on the beach was good Walter. And he must have been watching this affair going on the beach, because he came out of that house like he'd been struck by lightning. And he ran the whole length of the beach. He jumped into his own dory. And I told somebody the other day, I can still remember the strength of those arms as he pulled on those oars, and he went as fast as he could go. And he got them just as they were getting into the dangerous part of the water. And you know, the undertow there is terrific. So we were never allowed to be there unless we had supervision. And I remember one lady hired me to take care of her children up here. And I took care of them. I took them to the beach down there. And to my amazement, at the end of the summer, she found out that I was only 15. And her kids were 14. And she said, I thought you were 16 years old. But everything went fine, thank goodness. But that memory of good Walter on those oars with those arms, I can see that as if it were yesterday. And it was such a trauma that my mother was worried about the girl who had been her guest, of course, and there was a lady who was one of the families who had seen her husband drown before her eyes, and she ran all the way home. And she was a portly lady. She just couldn't stand it. And everybody packed up the picnic baskets. No one ate a picnic that day. It was a very, very upsetting time. But it taught us a lesson. Number one, if you play ball on the beach, you get up from the water. And number two, you never take somebody else's dory without permission. So we learned a lot that day. And we were lucky that people didn't drown.
You might be a little bit young for this question, actually, but tell me what you know about sort of when as far as your personal experience anyway, but as far as, tell me what you know about when the cars and the hard roads really started to be initiated on the Cape. I mean,
well, when my when my mother and dad came here as newlyweds in the fall of 1917, and Main Street was still a dirt road then at that time, and of course after a few years they began to get a paved road, but my recollection of Main Street was it was paved, but it had trees all along Main Street, and the trunks would be painted white, quite far up on the trunk, and especially in front of the Wayside Inn and right there in that particular center. And there were many, many trees brought back from the Orient called trees of heaven, and I think there's still maybe one or two, but there was one in the Wayside Inn lawn, and that's gone now. I don't know how many are left in front of what used to be the post office block there. But those were beautiful trees. And now as far as traffic was concerned, we would sit on our porch in the village on a summer's day. And you know, if 12 cars went by on a Sunday afternoon, it was a lot of cars. But of course, Harold Brown, who was our next door neighbor, built a great big long garage. And people from the Coast Guard used to store their cars in his garage. And he had a gas pump out in front of his yard. And they were a very enterprising couple. He had windmills that he made and all that, and they rented rooms. And so he could service cars. So cars came down for gas that might not ordinarily have come. And of course, at one time, George Brewster had a gas station and pump on the corner of Main Street and Hallett Lane. And so that was another place that attracted cars. But I remember that cars were absolutely stopped from moving one summer day when we had what they called an August twister. It was a terrific storm, and it took down a tree that was in our front yard that had a huge, huge trunk. Right across Main Street it went so that no one could get through, and they had to come and saw it apart in order to get people through. They had it dragged away, of course, with chains. But the very strange thing that had to do with that tree was that, this is I think it's a funny story. It was a 4th of July parade sometime after that whole storm had taken the tree down. And the stump was still in our yard. And the stump was about this tall. Very round, but only about this tall. Well, there was a 4th of July parade, and my mother and father and my brother and I were standing on the corner of Water Street in Maine, down by the lighthouse. And in the parade came this creature who was dressed up as a bear. I thought it was a real bear. It was one of my father's friends who was in a bear's costume. And what did he do? He came up to where we were and he grabbed me. and he ran with me so that he got back in the parade, and I screamed bloody murder. I was scared to death. And finally he had to take me back to my parents. I was screaming so. And you know that for years afterwards I dreamed about a bear chasing me. But do you know the funny part of it was the bear never could get me because I always could get up on the top of that stump in our front yard. And the silly part of it was if he wanted to get me, that stump was only so high. But in my childish mind, I thought I'd be safe on the top of that stump. Oh, that was kind of a funny thing about the traffic. The only day the traffic was stopped. But anyway, the village was a fun place to grow up because you always had a playmate. There were about 40 children very close to each other. If you try to write a bus line schedule, as I tried to do when I was principaling up here, you couldn't find a child in the village to put on a bus. The population had shifted, so and the way people, you know, all the summer people were there and that closed a lot of houses in the wintertime. So anyway, traffic-wise, I think that I could remember that Harold Brown had a car. I remember the Tuttles had a car. And the Goulds had a car. But very few people at first in the village had cars.
Were there more people coming down from Boston once the cars sort of became ubiquitous?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Were they different from the type of people that were here before, you know, who came down for the summer? Were they more day trippers or?
There were day trippers, of course, but there were people who came for a week or two, or sometimes a month. Rented homes. There was a lot of renting of houses in the village and renting of cottages. A lot of that went on, and that's why they had to have so many boarding houses and restaurants. And the little tavern used to be on the corner of Hallett Lane and Main Street after George Bruce's gas pumps went out. Mert Rogers owned that place, and they really fed a lot of people in that little place. She made 1,000 pies one summer. I remember that. So people, you know, were living in those houses and cottages.
Was there sort of an active movement around here to improve the roads? Were people trying to actively draw tourists down here by you know, making the roads?
Well, I think that was a part of it, but I think they probably wanted the roads made better for themselves too, as more and more people got cars. I'm sure that the natives wanted the roads to be good too, you know. And fortunately, of course, in recent years, Gibby has been doing a pretty good job for us, keeping things going. But it was a long time before those blacktops were in, because it was mud and sand when my mother first came, and my dad.
Did the RCA station, was that initiated in World War I, or was it before that?
Well, I'm not sure about the dates on that, but I do know that they were very active when I was very small. And as I grew older, I babysat for some of those men whose wives had children, and they lived in town, the McIntoshes, the Merriweathers. They didn't have children of their own, but they took care of other children. There were quite a few people who were good citizens of the town, in addition to being there at the Radio Marine station. That was a very enterprising place and added a lot to the town, I felt. And nice people, good citizens.
So the people that worked out there actually lived here on a year-round basis. It wasn't like
Yes.
they were moving in and out of the...
Not, of course there was some movement, but I think by and large they either bought homes or they rented homes, and they added a lot to the town. They really did. And of course they added security because of the ability to know what was going on overseas and under the water and whatnot. So I thought that was a good thing for Chatham when they came to town.
How about the Naval Air Station? That was another thing that was...
Yeah, now the Naval Air Station, the only memory I have of that is that my father and my uncle, who used to have a shoe store in Main Street for 60 years, probably before your memory, I don't know, used to talk about a Commander Reed who came from the Naval Air Station, and they were always proud of the fact that they sold him boots and shoes before he took off on his flight across the ocean. That's the only memory that I actually have.
That was one of the NC-4, I think, Cushing.
Yeah.
And maybe it was Reed. I think that was
Reed. I know that Reed is the name that I remember, and of course only because of the store. But that when I went up and saw in more recent times, all the land up there that place must have covered and how it was developed. And that's a really big part of the town today with beautiful homes.
It's hard to envision
Yeah,
that up
yeah.
there when you look at the old photos.
I know.
I mean, it
I
took me
know.
a while to realize where they were talking about, because
I know.
you see this big hangar and everything, and if you actually drive over there, like you said, it's just
It's
these,
amazing.
there's a lot
It's
of
amazing.
woods and stuff.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, this is a beautiful town, and I'm so happy that I grew up here. It
What do you
really
think
is-
makes it special here? I mean,
Oh.
it have a different flavor compared to Orleans, say?
Orleans is another nice town. If I had to make a choice, I probably would say I'd love to live in Orleans if I couldn't live in Chatham. But there's something about always being able to see the water, always, somewhere. There's always a beautiful vista, no matter where you go. And I think it's so important for those vistas to be maintained and not clutter up the whole landscape, every single acre, you know. But it was a wonderful place to grow up as a child. We had so many playmates, and there was so much to do. You know, we used to think it was great fun to get cardboard boxes and go up on the golf course and slide down on those cardboard boxes on the dried grass. Imagine kids thinking that was fun today? I don't know.
I used to do that too, actually, when I was little. So.
I used to think that was great fun. And then when we lived in the post office block, which we did for about 3 years when we were looking for a lot of land to buy, we kids, Arthur Brent, who later was in the Army Air Force and died young, we kids, with my brother Harry, constructed a miniature golf course. It isn't like it is today when you go to the Impudent Oyster and you look over and you see blacktop parking area. That place had lovely apartments, and it had a nice green area with a hedge around it. And we kids constructed a miniature golf course. We charged 5 cents a round. And I'll be darned if the president of the bank didn't come out and play around, and we thought we were a success when we did that. He was really funny, and he was a great soul. But we did all kinds of things. Football, you know, in the front of the chauffeurs' quarters, which used to be the headquarters for all the chauffeurs from Chatham Bars Inn. And they'd park the cars in what used to be the Chatham Bars Inn garage, which later became storage. And they had rooms in the chauffeurs' quarters. And we knew whose chauffeur belonged to which people and all that. So it was a lovely place to live for a while.
Did you ever see any of the activity going into the air station as far as the planes and the blimp and stuff?
No, see, I was born in 1918, which makes me in my 82nd year. So whatever I know about that is from pictures and stories and histories and all that. So
how about rum running?
Rum running. Well, there were all kinds of tales, but I never knew anybody who, as far as I knew, was a rum runner. Of course, maybe my father and mother would have known, but they wouldn't have told me anyway. But I recall a story about one man. He wasn't rum running necessarily, but a staunch member of the town. I was told that after he died, they found any number of bottles of scotch down in his well. That's the closest I ever came to knowing about rum running. But, you know, we used to hear tales as children, but I never saw any evidence.
So do you think it was fairly active around here, or do you think maybe that's overblown a little bit in the history?
I really have no way of knowing. I've heard tales that people came in at West Chatham on Harding's Beach, and for all I know, they might have come in on our own beach down here, but I never saw any evidence of any of that. But as a child, maybe I wouldn't have anyway, you know. Although I used to think I was pretty smart about knowing what was going on.
How about like in the 30s and 40s? I mean, do you see, looking back on you know, as long as you've known Chatham, do you see a lot of, how do you feel about the changes that have taken place in that period of time, in terms of just the visual landscape and also the tourism around here? I mean, do you think? Well, tell me a little bit about how you feel about that. Do you think the face of tourism has changed a lot? And
I think there's it seems to me that there's a great deal more day tripping that goes on these days, and I may be wrong about that, but that's the way it seems to me. We have pretty crowded sidewalks most of the summer in the Main Street area of town, and that to me says that there are people who are here for short-term period of time. Actually, as far as taking a view of the town as a whole, I think it's so important for us to preserve some of these vistas that make this a beautiful seaside town. And I hate to think that we're going to build on every single acre of land that is close to the shores, because that's what makes us what we are, really. But the wonderful thing about growing up here, especially in Depression time, was, there were people who were really starving, but we were so fortunate because we always could go down to the shore and get a meal. And that made a lot of difference in the way we survived the Depression. And I remember that. My father would go down and get a tub full of eels, spearing them through the ice here at Little Mill Pond. And we would go down to the end of the old Chatham Bars Inn pier, which was wooden and extended way out in the water, and my father and I would get flounder and bring those home. And it was really a wonderful place to be during that course of time. But, of course, our town has built up so much in this past 25 years especially. But everyone who comes as a summer person, eventually turns out to be a winter person, I find. And I can't blame them, because I love it. And I'm delighted that I grew up here. And I wouldn't have given it up for the world. And of course my brother, who lives on Long Island, and went off when he was 18 with his pack on his back to New York University, lives on Long Island today. But he'd love to get back here and live, And I think most people who grow up here never get over it.
Yeah, I think you're probably holding some. Do you think that the history is, the historical wealth of the town is well preserved, or
well, have
you seen a lot of it sort of pass away?
It troubles me when I see a house that has a lot of character to it, and it's knocked down and something put in its place that's bigger and maybe not true to the architecture of the town, which is a simple kind of architecture when you come right down to it. But I'm hoping that that's not going to happen too much more. I think, people who come to the Cape and come back really love it. And I hate to see people deprived of a chance to have a beautiful day. Little children deserve to have time at the beach, just as we who have been here all our lives. And it's a shame, not to provide a way for them to be here for a while. But somehow we have to solve some of our traffic problems, I think. And I don't know, we need to put our heads together to get an answer to that. But I don't know how many more people we could sustain, because more and more people want to come all the time. But I don't know. I certainly know what I felt like when I was working away from home for 27 years. The springtime would come and I would have given my eye teeth for just to look at the ocean for even 5 minutes. And if that was my feeling, I'm sure it's the feeling of thousands of other people.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
I always felt that way too. I'd be living perfectly happy in a city over the winter time. Job felt great and everything else.
Sure.
By the time March and April, I start feeling like, oh, this isn't so good.
I know. Well,
it kind of gets in your blood.
Oh, it sure does. It sure does. And of course, my folks were maritime people anyway. My father's folks came from Nova Scotia, and that was maritime living too. And so it's really in my blood, and my brother's too. Oh,
there.
Well, the Atwood House was bought by a group of ladies who had a lot of courage. Mrs. Alice Guild was one of the prime movers in getting that house. And her husband at one time was the principal of the high school here in town, Charles Guild. And they, in later years, lived over on Shattuck Place. They had a salt box house and a big piece of land and had beautiful gardens and kept cows. And she and those first few ladies bought the house, and I'm sure they scrimped and saved and raised money in every way that they could. Josephine Ivanoff was one of the young members of that group, and her mother was a woman dentist in town, Dr. Minnie Buck. and even she was involved as a young girl. They scrimped and saved and finally got the house built, fixed, so that it was livable as far as having displays in it. And they added a wing that I think my uncle built, which didn't necessarily match the architecture of the roof, but they needed more space. And it's been a native thing for a long time, but also more and more people who've come here part-time have taken more and more interest in it. And I believe now that there is a curator who has great experience and is excellent. And fortunately, there has been a staff of people through the years that cared enough to keep it going. I think of Eleanor Henderson, for instance, who was a native girl who lived in the village, and I grew up with her. And then Mildred Westhaver, who came in more recent years and lived here and bought a house in West Chatham, and Mildred and Eleanor worked together for years. And I'm sure they helped a great deal. And of course, Joe Nickerson was president for, he did everything there was to do for a good many years, I'm sure. And all kinds of work was done there by the natives and the people that they managed to entice to work with them in the summertime. And Alice Stockneck White, of course, who painted all the murals of the people in town. And Willard Nickerson, of course, was a president for a long time. And now Spencer Gray, and he's going to give it a few years of his life, I know that. And so there have been along the way some pretty wonderful people faithful to wanting to keep that as a wonderful place for people to see what life in Chatham was like. And fortunately, the house has been kept in good repair. I think Joe's done a lot to help on that. And it's a wonderful place to have for a town. I think people are thinking a lot more about what the future of that home is going to be and who's going to run it and how is it going to go. And I often think, I hope Joe was writing down some of these things because, he and I in the same class in high school, and I think, I hope that there are enough people who are just maybe 10 years younger than we are who will keep going because it's such a wonderful, wonderful place. And so many people have left treasures there. So I don't know. But I think the people who are there now have brought in a good many people who are here part-time. And I think that's a good thing. There always have been people from the very beginning who took an interest in it. And many people have served as president for several years in a row. So there's always been a pretty good board and pretty good people serving. And I love to go there. I like to go all alone. I don't want anybody to bother me. I want to walk through all the rooms and see all the things that have been brought in that are new and all the things that have been changed that are old. And I want to see which paintings have been revamped and redone and brought up to what they should be. And to me, it's a wonderful place to spend some time. I used to be more active in it than I am now, I must admit. But, I worked on the newsletter for about 10 years and stayed on the board and so forth. And, of course, I'm always proud that Joe's taken such an active part. And I just hope and pray that there will be enough people who are in the next stage of age below Joe and me who will carry it on. And I hope.
I think I read somewhere, it might have been in Home Song, that Marcia Mondolo's book,
yes.
Something about the history of the town being different from that of a lot of other towns because it has more of an active role rather than just being preserved as kind of dusty things on a shelf. That it actually has kind of a history, kind of an ongoing.
It has a life, and we've been trying also to have things go on a year-round basis, and it was made more possible by Ellie Cluett, who was a summer resident for many years and is now living in another part of the state. But Ellie had made a gift of having the fireplaces restored in such a way that they can be run in the wintertime. And that was a wonderful way to help us to have open house in weather that's really pretty nippy. So that was a great thing. And I think that the people who have been in there in the leadership roles have tried to have more things going on and to draw the young people from the schools in, which is one thing that I know Lenny Fougere, who's on the board now, wants to have happen. And I remember being in charge of young children who came down there, and we had guided tours for them. And I think that's starting up a little bit more again. So that's a good thing.
What do you think, if you look at, we were talking about this a little before, if you look at Chatham compared to, say, Harwich or Dennis or Orleans, what sort of qualities would stand out in your mind, as far as how you would describe Chatham?
Well, I would describe it as a place of great beauty because we project so far out into the ocean and pond and so forth, and the sound. So that is something that is prime. And I think we have so many lovely homes, some small, some big, some medium-sized, some old, some new, but we really have some lovely, lovely homes in this town. And I think, by and large, the people that I've known through the years that have been summer people who became winter people, and summer people who still continue to be summer people, we've had some wonderful people come to our town. And they've taken pride in what the town is, and I think they've helped to keep it a nice town in many, many ways. And I think I always talk about the summer people who come, who have invested in the lives of the native kids. And that happened in our family. And I know that there are many, many people who have helped young people in this town to go through college who might never have had a chance to go. And that's a thing that we don't always think about. But if I think of Chatham, I think of just a place where I just have to be. I have to see, every once in a while I just have to get down to that lighthouse and know that the ocean is still there. And of course I've ringed the pond in my lifetime. I was born at the foot of Elephant's Lane in a building that used to be a slaughterhouse at first. It was connected, it was changed into a home. And I was born there as World War I was ending. And although we didn't live there very long, we shared a house with other family members when my father was fishing and lobstering. They moved up to what used to be Charlie Harding's house on the way to the lighthouse, one of those big white ones. And we had a wing section there. And then we made our way around so that we lived in the block for just a few years after Main Street, and then we knew we wanted to have a place of our own. So Quilty, who owned the drugstore, which was in the red brick block, came to my mother one day because she'd had a new baby, the third one in the family, and she said, "Mrs. Forgeron, you've been getting that baby carriage up and down those stairs for such a long time." She said, "Wouldn't you like to have a house of your own and not have to do that anymore?" And of course that was just up my mother's and father's alley because they'd moved there hoping to find a lot of land around here. So we bought the land, and my father had saved enough money so that they paid, it was $500 for the lot of land, and they paid $475 because the Quilties gave them $25 off for paying cash. So $475 bought our land and land, which isn't big, but anyway, it was enough for us. So we built our house. So my life has ringed the pond, sort of.
So do you see, when you look back at the Chatham that you experienced growing up and now walking around today, do you see a different place? Or do you think that it's very much the same?
I see enough of the old that I'm always happy to be here and come back when I've gone. I'm so happy that we still have the openness of the golf course. I was very much afraid that that was going to be gone to condominiums or some such thing. But I am so grateful that that is open space because I'm selfish enough to consider that part of my heritage, that open space. And I want open space for us. I don't want every piece of land built on in gridlock. And I'm hoping that we'll do something about that in a very active way all the way along so that we keep the niceness of it and keep some land, some area to breathe. And that's selfish, I'm sure, because that's going to mean that some people can't come who would like to come. But this is a very precious place to our family. And they come back year after year. And the summer isn't complete, without getting back to the Cape. And so I guess it's like a disease.
Are there particular pieces of Chatham's history that you think are fairly unknown today that most people don't know about? Or you think that it's fairly well preserved? I mean, as far as we've sort of talked about some of the main things that are sort of part of the chronology of Chatham's history. But do you think there are little things that are when you look back at your own experience, do you think that most people have a pretty good idea for what that was like, or do you think that a lot of people have lost sight of
I don't know. I think the people who are my age now, they've seen the real old timers who started being summer people in the 1880s and the 1890s, and they've seen the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of those original settlers still coming and still caring about the place. And I'm sure that they feel that that's a good thing. And the people who have come in more recent times, who have bought property, for the most part, everyone takes pretty good care of his property in Chatham. And I think we all feel a responsibility to our neighbors that if our yard is not looking so great, we'd better do something about it, because we wouldn't want the neighborhood to feel offended. And I think there's a great conscience about that with most people that I know. And this little section around here, it's... when we first moved here, there were children in every house. And we had great playmates. We had somebody to play with all the time. And we had fields around us. When this house was built, this was an open field. There was an open field on the hill behind me. There was an open field from that house way over to the Cranberry bog. And there was an open field with blackberry bushes in that place where there's now a home. Not next door, but the one just beyond it. So when we moved, there was a great deal of open space here. Now, in the time that we've been here, since 1930, and this is now 2000, 70 years, in those 70 years, 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4 open field spots are now filled with homes. So in that sense, this area even has changed. And this is only a limited area of town.
Yeah.
But fortunately, the people who have come into this little area have been good neighbors. And right now, it's very different, though, because when we first moved here, there would be a light in every house in the wintertime, all winter long. Now, I have my light on. Sometimes the people on the corner have their light on. These people came for just a month, and now they're gone. They've just bought the house. There are lights in the house next to them. There are lights at the end of the road, and that's it. So our little area has changed from a lighted area to a very few lights. Although I wouldn't want to say that in case anybody wants to rob us.
So a lot of the places that maybe used to be more year-round are now bought up by people off Cape then? Yeah.
I think that I just hope that our lovely old homes that are bought by someone who is not native to Chatham will be carefully preserved so that we keep the flavor of the town as it was when it made people want to come here in the first place. If our town changes too drastically, the reasons why people first came may disappear. And that would trouble me. And that's kind of selfish, isn't it? But that's an important thing right now.
Well, thank you.
Well, I am not able to give you history from way back, but
No, that was great.
what little I remember,
Yeah.
I'm happy to share.